Recently, I made a video about Hugh Neutron, reflecting on how good of a father he is. In all reality, there are many aspects of his character that contribute to him being not only a good parent, but also an overall good person. The thing is though, nobody's perfect and we all make mistakes. Even Hugh. As a parent, through the process of raising your kids, you're gonna make mistakes. It's all part of the process, and the fact that the mistake happened isn't what defines you as a parent. It's how you react to that mistake and whether or not you learn from it. As humans, we should all be working towards growth. Again, nobody's perfect, and that's okay. In my opinion, being the narcissist who can never be wrong or make a mistake is the ultimate dead end in life. However, one of the worst mistakes that a lot of parents make, which often goes overlooked, is dragging your kids into something that they have no business being a part of. For the most part, kids are innocent, and a majority of kids are just trying to live their life as happy as possible. The last thing that they need is to be forced into something that they shouldn't be a part of as a result of parents imposing their bias where it isn't necessary. By all means, as a parent, it's our job to keep our kids safe in the way that we see fit. But there's a line between keeping them safe from danger and letting feelings from a pointless grudge dictate how they live their life. And to be honest, that line is a pretty bold one that's really hard to miss. Yet somehow it still gets overlooked very often. And that's why today, on our nostalgic walk down memory lane, we're going to check out an episode of Jimmy Neutron that really highlights that line and puts into perspective just how damaging it can be when you as a parent are on the wrong side of that line. But first, of course, thank you so much for being here, and if you enjoy this video, be sure to drop a like and let me know what you think down in the comments. Today, we're going to be looking at the Season 2 episode, The Feud. This episode starts out on a bright and sunny spring day while Jimmy and Carl are playing basketball in his driveway. Hugh walks out of his front door and starts reflecting on how perfect of a day it is today.
Looks like everything's hunky-dory in the world of Hugh Neutron. Sweet leaping crackers! The defiler of beloved lawns everywhere. My response must be swift and brutal.
Hey, Neutron. Just giving the old hedges a little trim before they start throwing off pollen spores.
Hugh approaches Carl's dad, saying that he needs his lawn lopper 300 back that he let him borrow so that he can take care of his grass. Carl's dad kindly reminds Hugh that he gave it back to him weeks ago. However, Hugh immediately argues with him, saying that he definitely didn't give it back.
It's probably in your garage. Why don't you check?
Actually, it's probably in your garage. I'll just go get it.
Hey, I already told you I gave it back, you wingding.
And I'm telling you, you didn't, tool hog.
Cheese brain.
Sneeze jockey.
Noodle head.
Just because my lawn is lush and silky, while yours is limp and hard to manage.
The two continue to bicker, taking it to the point of insulting each other's lawn decor as Hugh drags Carl's dad for having ceramic lawn kitties, while Carl's dad does the same towards Hugh's lawn ducks.
You put that down right now!
Hey, look at me. Quack, quack, quack. I'm a stupid lawn duck. Ah, 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 ah. Whoops.
Quack-a-lot!
As Hugh mourns the loss of his duck, he decides to smash Mr. Weezer's lawn kitty into pieces, saying that's the last straw. He declares that from this point on, the two of them are mortal enemies. Hugh walks up to Jimmy, and this happens.
Jimmy, send Carl home. From now on, we'll have nothing to do with him, or anyone named Weezer, or anyone who's ever wheezed.
But Dad, Carl's my best friend!
Not anymore. Come on, Carl. From now on, the Weezers and the Neutrons are sworn nemesis.
I think you mean nemesis.
You don't correct our ignorant enemies, son. Now, into the house. The air out here is thick with the stench of Weezer.
Bye, Jimmy. I'll never forget you.
Jimmy reassures Carl that there's no way this feud can last forever, and just like that, we cut to later that night where Jimmy is in his room calling Carl with his laptop to play a game of holographic Star Toad. As the two of them play virtually, Hugh bursts in, catching them playing together. He turns to holographic Carl and tells him that he has nothing against him personally, but this is a Weezer-free household now.
Dad, this isn't fair!
Now, son, I know this is hard, but you'll make other friends, non-Weezer friends.
But I want to hang out with Carl. And sooner or later, I'll invent a way to get around this feud.
Hey, thanks for reminding me.
The next morning, we see Jimmy in the kitchen with his mom, venting about how he just can't live like this anymore. Judy tells him that she has a plan, as she pulls a fresh baked pie out of the oven, saying that she made it as a peace offering for the Weezers. She heads over to talk to them, which gives Jimmy hope for the situation to be resolved. Jimmy gets up and walks over to put his cereal away, having finished breakfast, and he's shocked to find Sheen crammed into one of their cabinets.
I'm here to bring you and Carl back together through my exclusive Reach Out and Touch a Friend program.
What are you talking about?
Well, for just $4 a month, I'll secretly deliver messages between you and Carl. He's already selected a rap-themed greeting for an additional 3 cents a word. Dear Jimmy, how are you? What's up? What's new? Look, our dads won't listen, but it's you I've been missing.
Jimmy tells Sheen that none of this is necessary because his mom is next door mending the bridge right now. However, just then, we hear what sounds like a bit of a struggle outside.
Somebody, get my back! Get my back! Ah, ah. You knew my husband was allergic to brambleberry pie. You're just a dupe for that hateful husband of yours.
Hateful? You take that back!
Never, allergy giver.
Venom spitter?
She-witch.
Hag woman?
Judy goes up to Jimmy and screams at him to never mention the name Carl again. Feeling defeated, Jimmy asks Sheen to arrange a meetup between him and Carl, and just like that, we cut over to a nearby park where Carl is approaching in a sombrero, fake mustache, and boots with spurs. Meanwhile, Jimmy is dressed up as a cactus.
Oh, it's really good to see you, Carl. Do you have the components I asked you to bring?
Sure, Jimmy. Here's the perpetual motion gyro top you gave me last year.
And here's the non-sucking hydraulic loopy straw you gave me.
Great. My dad thinks he's cut me off from technology, but he forgot about Goddard.
Jimmy explains his plan to remedy the situation. He says that he's going to use these devices with some parts from Goddard to make a crabgrass accelerator. His theory is that with both of their lawns overgrowing like crazy, his dad and Carl's dad will have no choice but to forget this feud and work together to save their lawns.
This ought to do the trick. After all, science has never let us down before.
What about the time science almost made that meteor hit the town?
And the time science blocked out the sun and nearly created a second ice age.
Okay. Science almost usually never lets us down. Ready, guys?
We cut on over to Carl and Jimmy's houses, where Jimmy approaches and begins to use his device on their lawns. As the crabgrass starts sprouting like no tomorrow, we see both dads come out to find their mutual worst nightmare has come true.
This is all your fault, Weezer!
No. The crabgrass started on your lawn, Neutron. I guess this neighborhood just can't have nice things.
You're both wasting time. The only way to fight an infestation this big is for you to work together.
Never. No lawn is worth that.
I'd rather be dipped in pickle juice and thrown to rabid weasels.
Ditto.
Goodbye, old friend. Avenge you I will!
As the three friends feel like they've reached a dead end, Carl says that he refuses to let his friendship with Jimmy end like this. He walks up to Jimmy and takes the device away from him, deciding to create more crabgrass.
You've started a mutagenic growth cycle and it's out of control!
At this point, both Hugh and Mr. Weezer come outside to find their kids being attacked by their lawns, and they both decide that they need to jump into action. Judy passes Hugh one of Jimmy's laser swords, and Mrs. Weezer passes Mr. Weezer some weed killer. The two attack and an epic battle commences. two of them continue to fight the massive weeds, unknowingly battling side by side. The two of them finish off the last of the giant weeds, and we see the two families come together to talk. Carl and Jimmy beg them to let the fight be over so that they can be friends again. They all realize that their two families may have their differences, but they need to set those differences aside for the sake of their kids.
I agree 100%. Just as soon as Weezer admits that he took my lawn lopper.
I did not!
Stupid head.
Moron face!
You mucus monkey.
Duck lover!
Duck lover?
The two continue to argue until their wives begin to smack them with brooms and get them to stop bickering. Just then, Sheen remembers that Sam, the owner of the candy bar, paid him to deliver Hugh a message with a nice festive polka theme.
Thanks for letting me your lawn lopper, yodelay, yodelay, yodelay. I'll return it in the next few days, yodelay, yodelay. That'll be $4, please. Of course, we could discuss a preferred customer discount.
This episode has me rolling my eyes so hard, if I'm being honest with you guys. This episode is a good one, don't get me wrong, but in all reality, it always drove me nuts as a kid. As an adult, however, I'm struggling with it just a little bit. I'm not sure if it drives me nuts now more than it did back then. Like, seeing this as a kid, I was obviously taking it from a kid's perspective. Thinking about it more like, man, I'd be so upset if my parents did that to one of my friendships. However, looking at it now, it comes from an adult standpoint, and more importantly, from a parent standpoint. Seeing this now, I can't help but think about how much I could never imagine doing this to one of my kids. As parents, we somehow overlook how much we imprint on our children. Like, it's pretty common for young kids to mimic and echo the same ideals, characteristics, and behaviors that they've seen from their parents literally through their entire lives. In this case, though, it's not a matter of your kid replicating your behavior because that's what they've seen. It's a matter of forcing your kid to replicate your behavior much to their dismay. Like, I can't imagine imposing these kinds of feelings on my kids. If we look at the big picture here, Hugh and Mr. Weezer had an argument over something really stupid. Then the argument boils over into the point of name-calling and ridicule. From there, Hugh declares that their entire families are gonna be mortal enemies now. All of that because of a disagreement that's strictly between him and one other person. The thought of dragging your kids into the middle of your argument just drives me absolutely insane. This kind of thing happens all the time in everyday life as well, and it's just completely pointless. In all reality, Hugh and Mr. Weezer can hate each other without having to drag their kids into the mix. Like, all things considered, how does dragging their kids into the picture even benefit either of them? Carl and Jimmy associating with each other and being best friends doesn't have a single thing to do with either of them or the argument over their lawns, and really it's just them imposing their bias on their kids in a very down-your-throat sort of way. As a matter of fact, them doing this is downright detrimental to both of their kids. Jimmy and Carl are best friends, and they have been for years. It sucks to think that their parents would be willing to come between them over something so trivial. Again, don't get me wrong, they're allowed to not like each other. They can even argue as much as they want and have their feelings. That's totally okay. But the moment that they start exhibiting these actions that directly affect their children is when the problem really arises. The thing is, arguments like this are going to be had, and sometimes they're necessary. Let's say that Mr. Weezer really did have Hugh's Lawn Lopper 300 and was refusing to let Hugh have it back. Yeah, I mean, I can't blame Hugh for getting upset. I'd be pretty pissed off too. However, there are better ways to go about confrontations like this. Dragging your kids into it certainly is not one of them. As far as the argument itself goes, though, I will say this much. I'm kind of biased myself. I think this whole thing is stupid from start to finish. Specifically because it's revolving around their lawns. Don't take me the wrong way, the real core of the issue here was Hugh's allegedly missing property, but like, their fuel they threw on the fire to take jabs at each other all revolved around their grass. Hugh was very conceited and pretentious about it from the start, saying that Mr. Weezer's lawn is limp and hard to manage. Meanwhile, Mr. Weezer matched that same exact energy, dishing it right back at Hugh. They drag each other over the appearance of their lawns and ridicule one another over their lawn decorations. And I'm over here like, you're both stupid. I say I'm biased because I personally can't stand people who obsess over their lawns. I mean, I care about what my house looks like, and I try to not let it get crazy overgrown, but I'm not going to sit here with a ruler measuring every single blade of grass and perfecting every last square inch. If I'm being transparent about it, this all stems from my next door neighbor from when I lived in Washington. This guy was straight up obsessed with his lawn. It had to be perfect and immaculate at all times, and if mine wasn't the same, he would make comments about it to me all the time, which in turn would make me want to let my lawn grow like crazy just to spite him. I'm over here like, dude, if you care about other people's lawns so much, move into a neighborhood with an HOA so that you can actually enforce it. Like, in my old neighborhood, there were rundown crack houses that were straight up in shambles and completely overgrown. Meanwhile, this guy was up in arms about my lawn because it was half an inch taller than his. With that being said though, that's all very me specific. We're talking about a cartoon here. Hugh and Mr. Weezer are being portrayed as hyperbolized caricatures of people who care way too much about their yards. However, this is pretty much the same exact energy that my old next door neighbor has. The bad news for him though is that I didn't really care about what he thought, so his comments about my lawn weren't going to make me mow it any sooner than I had originally planned to. The argument between Mr. Weezer and Hugh, on the other hand, is one that would escalate very quickly because both of them are guys who seem to care a lot about not only their lawns, but also what everyone in the neighborhood thinks about their lawns. All things taken into consideration, they're both in the wrong. I will say though that Hugh is more so in the wrong. He approached Mr. Weezer, and from the get-go he was very smug and was acting really holier than thou.
Yeah, Weezer, I'm gonna need my lawn lopper back.
Well, gee, Neutron, I gave that thing back weeks ago. You must have forgot.
Forgot about my lawn lopper 300 Pro Deluxe as seen on TV? I don't think so.
Now, Mr. Weezer getting elevated in response to Hugh being a massive douche was definitely not the right move. But with that being said, Hugh was definitely the one who started the fight to begin with. In the end too, we even learned that Hugh was completely in the wrong. Mr. Weezer didn't even have his lawn lopper to begin with, so Hugh treating him that way was completely uncalled for on all levels. Like, specifically speaking, it drove me insane that the whole argument was over the fact that Mr. Weezer did give the lawn lopper back. Meanwhile, Hugh was very quick to bring up the fact that this was just because his lawn was lush and silky while Mr. Weezer's is limp and hard to manage. This right here said a lot about how Hugh was perceiving the situation and proves how he really was the one instigating the problem further. Hugh was insinuating that Mr. Weezer had the lawn lopper and was intentionally stealing it from Hugh because Hugh has the superior lawn. All in all, it can be boiled down to the fact that this was a simple misunderstanding. However, Hugh was the one who wanted to assume the worst and paint a negative picture of Mr. Weezer. With that being said though, it's important to note that it takes two to tango. This isn't all on Hugh. Sure, he started it and further instigated it, but Mr. Weezer played into it and perpetuated the nonsense that Hugh was peddling. In all reality, Mr. Weezer could have taken Hugh into his garage and showed him that he didn't have the lawn lopper in there and proved that Hugh was wrong. Maybe that would have even jogged his memory so he might remember lending it to Sam. However, the two of them let their egos trump logic here and escalated this into a situation that would ultimately pit the two families against one another. One thing I find funny though is the fact that these two men who are at each other's throats just have so much in common with one another. I mean, we're talking about two dads who love their wives, have one child, that child being a son, each owning their houses next door to one another. They both care about their lawns way too much, and they each have their obsessions, with Hugh's being ducks and Mr. Weezer's being cats. It's just kind of ironic, all things considered. I gotta go in a little more about how these two treated their kids though. In the beginning, we hear Mr. Weezer tell Carl that he's not Jimmy's best friend anymore and that he doesn't want him associating with Jimmy. However, that's about the end of it. We don't really see Mr. Weezer do much more than that as far as actions that directly affect Carl go. Hugh, on the other hand, really got the spotlight as far as his lame actions are concerned. For example, when we see Jimmy in his room playing holographic video games with Carl, Hugh comes in and puts an end to it. He tells Carl that he has nothing against him personally, which is just dumb because this literally is a tirade against all Weezers, so yeah, it is personal. Then on top of that, we also see Hugh go as far as boarding up Jimmy's laboratory to stop him from inventing anything to help him get closer to Carl. Like, this right here is just so counterproductive that it's almost hilarious. Jimmy's lab is a sacred place for him. He does his inventing there, and even more importantly, he does a lot of experimenting and learning there. I mean, what's he gonna do next? Ban Jimmy from going to school because him and Carl are in the same class? This is exactly what I'm talking about when I bring up the dangers of imposing your bias on your kids. It toes the line where you react so irrationally that you start damaging your children just to prove your point. One thing that I really appreciate about this episode, though, is how the events going on here weren't a recurring thing. It's really not often that we see Hugh, or even Mr. Weezer for that matter, get angry and react so obnoxiously. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and trash them as parents because on the whole, they're both good dads who take care of their kids. However, like I said earlier, we all make mistakes. What really matters is that in the end, they learn from their mistakes and were willing to move forward in a more healthy direction as a result of the lesson learned. Speaking of the end though, who would have thought that all along this was all Sheen's fault? Of course, Hugh is still to blame as he's the one who forgot that he had lent his lawn lopper to Sam at the candy bar, but if Sheen had delivered that message in a timely manner, like Sam paid him to, Hugh definitely would have remembered that he had let him borrow it. All of this unnecessary fighting could have been completely avoided, but hey, at least it makes for good TV. All things considered, I'd say that this episode is a good one, and it serves an important purpose in the grand scheme of things. As a kid seeing this, sure, it drove me nuts and made me fear something like this happening to me as a result of one of my parents being irrational. But as an adult, this episode serves as an excellent reminder of how to treat your kids and of course to be mindful of how your actions can affect them. On an overall human level though, this is an excellent reminder for all of us to keep ourselves in check and make sure that our problems don't get directed at the wrong person. Their children being dragged into this argument was completely unnecessary, and episodes like this one really serve as a perfect example of how not to handle these specific situations. But what do you guys think? Did this episode drive you nuts as a kid? What about now that you're an adult? Let me know in the comments down below. I value your guys' opinions so much, and I love seeing your feedback. Of course, I have to give a massive shout out to my friends in the True 90s Kids tier over on Patreon. I really appreciate you guys, and I can't thank you enough for supporting me, especially right now with everything that I have going on in my life. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like and give some praise to the YouTube algorithm in hopes that it pushes this video to everyone else, and as always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.